I'm Dorothy Carter, a spry 72-year-old gal who's been through a whirlwind with my family. This tale's got betrayal, heartbreak, and some twists that'll make your jaw drop. So grab a cup of tea and settle in. I was over the moon for my granddaughter Lauren's wedding in June 2024. I'd been planning for weeks, fussing over every detail to make sure I looked just right. I picked out a coral dress that my late husband, Frank, a retired engineer with a passion for birdwatching, always said made me look like a sunset. Frank passed from leukemia 4 years ago, and I wanted to honor him by wearing that dress, feeling his spirit with me. Looking in the mirror, I whispered, "You look radiant, Dorothy," imagining Frank's warm voice cheering me on. The ceremony was straight out of a fairy tale. Lauren floated down the aisle in a lacy gown, her face glowing like she'd swallowed a star. My son Brian, her dad, was all puffed up with pride, his grin as wide as the Mississippi. His wife, Nancy, even shed a tear, which is rare for her. She's usually all business. The stained glass windows cast rainbows across the pews, and the organ played a hymn that made my heart swell. For those moments, everything felt perfect, like we were the family I'd always dreamed we were. I sat there, clutching my handkerchief, thinking how proud Frank would have been to see his little girl's girl tying the knot. But then came the reception at the hotel, and oh lordy, that's when my heart took a tumble. The ballroom was a sight, crystal chandeliers twinkling, tables draped in ivory linens, and a dance floor big enough to host a hoedown. I sashayed over to the check-in table, where a perky young gal was handing out name tags. "Here you go, Mrs. Carter," she said with a smile, passing me a card. I glanced down, expecting to see Dorothy Carter, grandmother of the bride. Instead, in fancy calligraphy, it read, "The old crone bankrolling this bash." My hand froze and my stomach dropped like I just missed a step on the stairs. I blinked, thinking it was a mistake, but there it was, mocking me in black ink. I looked up at the gal, and her smile faltered. "Is something wrong?" she asked, her eyes wide. I forced a chuckle, my cheeks burning hotter than a July barbecue. "Oh, just a little mix-up, dear," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'll sort it out with my family." I pinned that awful tag to my coral dress, feeling like a fool dressed up for a clown show. Every step into the ballroom felt heavier, like I was wading through molasses. I could hear guests chuckling behind their champagne flutes, their whispers slicing through me. "Did you see Dorothy's name tag? Nancy said it was meant to be cute." My heart cracked like old porcelain. Nancy, my daughter-in-law, thought this was cute? My own family sticking a knife in my back and calling it a joke? I stood there, clutching my purse, feeling like I'd been stripped bare in front of everyone. I'd poured my heart into this day, $60,000 of my savings to make Lauren's dream wedding come true. Not to mention the love I'd poured into every detail. And this was how they repaid me? By turning me into a punchline? I wanted to march up to Brian and Nancy and demand answers, but I didn't want to ruin Lauren's day. So I plastered on a smile, sipped my sparkling water, and tried to pretend I wasn't bleeding inside. But oh, let me tell you, that betrayal stung deeper than a wasp in August. How could my own kin humiliate me like this on a day meant for joy? I felt like I'd been tossed aside, reduced to nothing but a checkbook with a pulse. So that's where it all began. I'm still reeling from that name tag, and it's just the start of this mess. After that name tag fiasco at Lauren's wedding reception, I was determined to keep my spirits high. I smoothed my coral dress, the one Frank, my late husband, loved, and waded into the hotel's ballroom. I grabbed a glass of sparkling cider, hoping to shake off the sting of being called the old crone bankrolling this bash. My heart was still raw, but I thought, "Dorothy, you're here for Lauren. Don't let it ruin her day." I mingled with folks, chatting about the flowers, roses and peonies in soft pinks, and how Lauren's gown looked like something from a magazine. But my stomach was doing flips like I'd eaten bad potato salad. I couldn't shake the feeling that everyone was staring at that awful name tag pinned to my chest. Then, as I reached for a mini quiche from a passing tray, I overheard two of my cousins, Betty and June, whispering near the dessert table. "Nancy told me Dorothy's their money tree," Betty said, her voice low but sharp. "Brian's sure she'll keep footing the bill for everything." June giggled, adding, "Why wouldn't she? She's got Frank's fortune." My hands shook so bad I nearly dropped my cider. It felt like someone had tossed ice water in my face. Money tree? My own son and daughter-in-law reducing me to a cash dispenser? I stepped behind a potted fern, my heart pounding like a drum, trying to process the betrayal. Just then, Brian spotted me and waved me over to a group of his old pals from his accounting days. "Mom, come meet the Thompsons," he called, his voice booming over the music. I plastered on a smile and shuffled over, my name tag feeling like a neon sign. "This is my mom, Dorothy, our family vault," Brian said with a big laugh like he'd told the funniest joke. The Thompsons, John and Mary, who I vaguely recalled from Frank's birdwatching club, looked uneasy. Mary's smile wobbled as she glanced at my tag, and John coughed into his napkin. I felt my cheeks burn hotter than a skillet. "Dorothy Carter, Frank's widow," I said, sticking out my hand, trying to salvage some dignity. The conversation stumbled along, but I barely heard it, my mind stuck on Brian's words. Family vault? Is that all I was to him? When the Thompsons drifted off, I pulled Brian aside near a floral arch. "What's with this?" I asked, pointing to my name tag, my voice quivering. He chuckled, rolling his eyes. "Oh, Mom, lighten up. It's just a little fun. Everyone knows you're rolling in it since Dad passed." Nancy swooped in, her sequin dress sparkling like her fake smile. "Dorothy, you're the star of this show. Everyone knows you paid for this gorgeous wedding," she said, winking like we were in on some grand joke. I felt like I'd been kicked in the gut. My own son and his wife, treating me like a walking piggy bank in front of everyone? I mumbled, "I need a moment," and hightailed it to the bathroom, my pearl earrings swaying with every shaky step. Inside, I locked myself in a stall, tears burning my eyes like hot coals. I'd poured my heart into this family, knitting them scarves for Christmas, cheering at Lauren's recitals, and now this? I felt disrespected, used like a doormat they'd wiped their fancy shoes on. As I leaned against the sink, the door creaked open, and in walked Diane Foster, a dear old friend of my late husband, Frank. Diane, who traded her lawyer days for a cozy flower shop downtown, looked sharp in a navy blazer, her silver hair swept into a bun. She caught sight of my name tag and her face turned stormy, like a summer squall rolling in. "Dorothy, what in heaven's name is that?" she asked, pointing at the tag, her voice tight with indignation. I tried to laugh it off, but it came out more like a hiccup. "Oh, just a little family humor, I guess," I said, my throat tight. Diane's eyes narrowed. "Frank would have been spitting mad over this," she said, her tone sharp enough to cut glass. "He'd have torn that tag to shreds and given Brian a talking to." I sighed, feeling the weight of her words. Frank, my birdwatching engineer who passed from leukemia 4 years ago, was always my protector, the one who'd hold my hand through any storm. Diane hesitated, then leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Dorothy, there's something you need to know. Frank left a safeguard for you." My heart skipped a beat. "What kind of safeguard?" I asked, clutching my purse like a lifeline. She reached into her blazer pocket and pulled out a folded envelope, the paper crisp and official looking. "It's a codicil to Frank's will," she said, her eyes steady. "I deliberately brought it with me today, as I sensed that today would be the right time to give it to you. He added it before he passed, but he didn't want you to know unless it was absolutely necessary." I opened the envelope with shaky fingers, the bathroom's quiet hum fading as I read the legal jargon. It was clear as day. Any family member who publicly shames me loses their share of Frank's inheritance. A fortune way bigger than I'd ever imagined, millions tucked away from his engineering patents and savvy investments. I looked up at Diane, my mouth dry as a desert. "Why didn't he tell me?" I croaked. She smiled sadly. "Frank wanted your family to love you for you, not for the money. He hoped it'd never come to this, but he knew Brian had a greedy streak." I felt like I'd been hit by a freight train. Frank, my sweet Frank, who'd spend hours watching cardinals through his binoculars, had built this safety net to protect me from beyond the grave. The betrayal from Brian and Nancy burned hotter now, but this codicil? It was like a hidden ace up my sleeve. Diane handed me the document, her hand warm against mine. "What do you want to do with this?" she asked softly. I folded the paper, tucking it into my purse next to my knitted handkerchief. "Nothing yet," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I need to see just how low they'll go." The hurt was still raw like a fresh bruise, but now I had a plan brewing. A way to turn their betrayal into my strength. I straightened my shoulders, gave Diane a grateful nod, and headed back to the reception, That name tag still pinned to my chest but feeling less like a wound and more like a badge of what was to come. The morning after Lauren's wedding, I sat at my kitchen table, still in my fuzzy slippers and robe, staring at that wretched name tag. The old crone bankrolling this bash. It sat there on my checkered tablecloth, mocking me like a bad penny. My coffee had gone cold and my heart felt like a used dish rag wrung out and tossed aside. The hotel's glitz, those chandeliers, that jazz band, felt like a distant dream now, replaced by the bitter taste of Brian and Nancy's betrayal. Calling me their family vault, and letting folks snicker at my expense? It hurt worse than a bee sting on a hot day. I shuffled to my desk, a sturdy oak piece Frank picked out years ago, and dug out a box of old bank records from the bottom drawer. The papers smelled of dust and time, each one a reminder of my life with Frank. I spread the statements across the table, my knitted placemats peeking out beneath. As I pored over them, my eyes widened. Over the past 4 years, I'd handed Brian and Nancy $400,000, $60,000 for Lauren's wedding, $30,000 for a fancy new HVAC system, $20,000 for cruises to Alaska and the Caribbean, even $15,000 for Lauren's shiny red convertible when she turned 20. The numbers stared back at me, cold and undeniable, like a ledger of my broken trust. It all started small, sneaky as a mouse. 9 months after Frank's passing, Brian and Nancy invited me to their place for supper. I can still picture it. Their dining room aglow with candles, the smell of roast chicken, and Nancy's overly sweet smile. Over apple pie, Brian cleared his throat. "Mom, we're thinking of sprucing up our deck," he said, passing me a glass of iced tea. "Nothing big, just a $25,000 remodel to make it family-friendly." Nancy chimed in. "With Lauren's college costs, we're stretched thin." I was still raw from losing Frank, my heart aching for family closeness, so I wrote the check, thinking I was helping my son build a home. Now, looking at those records, I saw it for what it was. The first step in a long con playing on my grief like a cheap fiddle. I pushed the papers aside and wandered to my living room, where a family photo from our 50th anniversary hung above the fireplace. There we were, Frank grinning like he'd spotted a rare warbler, Brian and Nancy arm in arm, Lauren all braces and giggles, and me, my hand on Frank's shoulder, believing we were a team. When did they stop seeing me as mom and start seeing dollar signs? I traced Frank's face in the frame, my fingers lingering on his kind eyes. He'd have been heartbroken to see me treated like a cash machine. The betrayal twisted in my chest like a dull knife, each memory of their requests, cars, trips, home upgrades, cutting deeper. I'd given so much, thinking it was love, but now I saw it was just greed dressed up in family smiles. I sat back down, my coffee mug heavy in my hands. How had I been so blind? I'd knitted them scarves, cheered at their milestones, poured my heart into this family, only to be reduced to a punchline. The hurt was raw, but a spark of resolve flickered inside me. I wasn't ready to act yet, but I was starting to see my family for who they really were. I was sipping tea, the kind Frank used to love, when my phone rang. It was Nancy, her voice dripping with honey. "Dorothy dear," she cooed. "We can't thank you enough for making Lauren's wedding so spectacular." I murmured a polite "you're welcome," picturing the $60,000 I'd shelled out for hotel's ballroom. But then she pivoted, quick as a cat. "You know, Kevin's parents were supposed to cover the honeymoon to the Bahamas, but their business hit a rough patch, and they can't afford it now. Lauren's heartbroken. We were hoping you'd step in with $20,000 to make it happen." I nearly choked on my tea, my pearl earrings swaying as I froze. Another demand? After they'd humiliated me? My stomach churned like I'd swallowed a sour lemon. "Oh, Nancy," I said, my voice shakier than I liked. "That's a big ask. I'll need to think about it." The words slipped out before I could stop them, and I swear I heard her gasp. Me, Dorothy, the pushover who'd given them $400,000 over 4 years, saying no? I was as shocked as she was. "Well, don't wait too long," she said, her sweetness fading. "They need to book soon." I hung up, my hands trembling, and set the phone on my oak table. I'd always been the one to smooth things over, knitting scarves for their birthdays, but this felt like another knife in my back. Then came a knock at my door, and through the peephole, I saw my grandson Caleb, 25, looking nervous as a long-tailed cat in a room full of rockers. Caleb, a freelance photographer who's always pedaling around on his bicycle, has Frank's kind hazel eyes. I opened the door and he hugged me tight, his camera bag slung over his shoulder. "Grandma, I'm so sorry about that name tag," he said, his voice thick with guilt. "I saw it at the wedding and I should have spoken up." I patted his arm, ushering him to my cozy living room, where my knitted afghan draped over the couch. "It's all right, sweetheart," I said, but my heart was still sore. We sat with mugs of tea and Caleb fidgeted, running a hand through his messy hair. "There's something else," he said, looking down at his sneakers. "I overheard Dad and Mom talking yesterday. They were saying your house is too big for an old lady alone, and they're planning to convince you to sell it." My jaw dropped lower than a bargain bin. Sell my house? The one Frank and I built, with its rose garden and the porch where we'd watch birds? I was livid, my cheeks hotter than a July sidewalk. But Caleb's honesty, his worried eyes, touched me deeply. He wasn't like his parents, and that gave me a flicker of hope. Right then I made up my mind. I'd play their game, let Brian and Nancy think they had me wrapped around their finger, all while holding Frank's codicil like a secret trump card. They'd dig their own graves, and I'd use that codicil to make them pay for treating me like a cash machine. I looked at Caleb, my heart swelling with gratitude. "You're a good egg, kiddo," I said, managing a grin. Knowing Frank's codicil gave me a secret weapon, I decided to attend a post-wedding brunch at the club, hoping to gauge my family's next move. I slipped into a navy blouse and cream slacks, my pearl earrings gleaming, and pinned a knitted brooch I'd made to my collar for courage. The club was all elegance. Polished wood floors, vases of lilies, and windows overlooking manicured greens where golfers chatted. I took a deep breath, the scent of my rose perfume steadying me, and stepped into the private dining room. The table was set with crisp linens, silverware glinting under chandeliers. Lauren and her new husband Kevin were there, along with Brian, Nancy, my grandson Caleb, and a handful of relatives. "Dorothy, you made it," Nancy called, her emerald dress sparkling like her calculated smile. Brian waved me to a seat next to Kevin's parents, folks I barely knew, which stung a bit. I sipped orange juice, trying to enjoy the quiche and fruit platters, but my stomach churned like a stormy sea. After all I'd given, I felt like a guest at my own family's show. Halfway through the meal, Nancy clinked her glass, silencing the chatter. "I want to thank everyone for making Lauren and Kevin's wedding so magical," she said, her voice syrupy. "And a special shout out to Dorothy, who's been so generous." All eyes turned to me, and I forced a smile, my knitted brooch feeling heavy. Then she dropped the bomb. "I'm thrilled to announce Dorothy's funding their dream honeymoon to the Bahamas." The room clapped, but I froze, my fork midair. I hadn't agreed to a dime. My heart pounded like a drum, rage bubbling up like a pot left too long on the stove. I set my fork down, hands trembling but voice steady. "Actually, Nancy, I haven't agreed to pay for any honeymoon," I said, loud enough for all to hear. The room went quiet as a church mouse. Lauren's face flushed, and Kevin stared at his plate. "It's not right to volunteer my money without asking," I added, my tone firm but polite. Brian leaned in, hissing, "Mom, don't make a scene." "A scene? After they'd humiliated me?" I straightened, my navy blouse crisp. "I'm not making a scene, Brian. I'm suggesting Lauren and Kevin plan a trip they can afford, maybe to the Smoky Mountains." Nancy's smile cracked, her eyes flashing. "But you said you'd think about it." "And I'm still thinking," I shot back, my resolve hard as my oak table at home. Then out of nowhere, Kevin mumbled, "It's my fault. My parents aren't broke. I lied to make you feel bad so you'd pay." The room gasped, and I felt like I'd been hit by a runaway golf cart. Another betrayal, this time from my new grandson-in-law? My cheeks burned, but I kept my cool. "Thank you for being honest, Kevin," I said, though it took every ounce of grit. "Let's talk privately later." I stood, smoothing my slacks, and said, "Lauren, Kevin, I wish you joy, but my finances aren't public business." Caleb jumped up. "I'll walk you out, Grandma." As we left, my legs wobbled, but a fire sparked inside me, hotter than a summer barbecue. They'd pushed me too far, and I was ready to make them pay. By the time my 72nd birthday rolled around in January 2025, I was still smarting from Lauren's wedding, that old crone name tag, Brian's family vault jab, Nancy's $20,000 honeymoon demand, and Kevin's lie about his parents' finances. Knowing Frank's codicil could cut my kin out of millions for shaming me gave me a secret edge. I'd spent months knitting cozy blankets, taking calligraphy classes at the community center, and sidestepping Brian and Nancy's money grabs. When my grandson Caleb insisted on hosting a family dinner at my house, I agreed, though my gut told me trouble was brewing. I decked out my dining room with my best lace tablecloth, polished silver, and a vase of daisies from my garden. Caleb arrived early, setting out my homemade lasagna and garlic bread, his camera bag tucked in the corner. Lauren and Kevin showed up, followed by Brian and Nancy, their smiles as fake as a $3 bill. Diane Foster, Frank's old lawyer friend who now runs a flower shop, joined us, along with a few of Frank's birdwatching buddies. The air felt thick like a storm was coming, but I kept my smile bright, passing the salad bowl. Dinner was tense, with Nancy's compliments on my cooking sounding forced. After dessert, my lemon cake, Frank's favorite, Brian cleared his throat, standing up like he was about to give a speech. "We need to talk about Mom," he said, his voice loud enough to hush the table. "Nancy and I are worried about her decisions lately. Funding Caleb's photography studio? It's reckless, unstable." My fork clattered to my plate. Unstable? Me, who taught school for decades and knitted half the town's scarves. Nancy nodded, her diamond earrings glinting. "We think it's time for a power of attorney to protect her." I was furious, my heart racing like a runaway horse. Calling me crazy to control my money? After all their betrayals? I opened my mouth, but Diane beat me to it, her voice calm but sharp. "That's a serious claim, Brian. Got any proof?" Brian sputtered. "She's throwing money at Caleb's risky venture." I stood, my shawl slipping. "I'm not unstable," I said, my voice steady as my oak table. "I've funded your lives for years, cars, cruises, weddings, and I'm done being your piggy bank." Diane pulled an envelope from her purse, the same one she'd shown me in June. "Frank foresaw this," she said, holding it up. "He added a codicil to his will. Anyone who publicly shames Dorothy loses their inheritance, millions from his patents." The room froze. Lauren's eyes widened, Kevin stared at his cake, and Brian's face turned red as my lasagna sauce. "I'm enforcing it," I said, looking at Brian and Nancy. "You're out." Lauren, who'd stayed quiet through their schemes, lost her share too, per the codicil's terms. Brian slammed his napkin down. "You trapped us," he shouted. I shook my head. "You trapped yourselves." Caleb squeezed my hand under the table, his support like a warm blanket. I felt liberated, like I'd finally shed a heavy coat of betrayal. A month later, where I enforced Frank's codicil and cut Brian, Nancy, and Lauren out of millions for shaming me, I was thriving like a rosebush in spring. I'd found my groove, teaching calligraphy classes at the community center, my hands steady as I guided folks through elegant loops and swirls. I'd even taken a trip to Greece last fall, wandering Santorini's whitewashed streets, my pearl earrings catching the Mediterranean sun. My late husband, Frank, would have loved the vibrant markets and azure waves. I felt alive, my knitted cardigans packed away for breezy linen dresses. Each day a step away from the hurt of that old crone name tag in Brian's family vault jab. My grandson Caleb was my pride and joy. His photography studio was the talk of the town, with his black and white prints of local landscapes drawing crowds. I'd hung my knitted wall hangings, colorful patterns I'd crafted during those tough months, on his studio walls, and folks raved about the cozy vibe. Caleb, always pedaling around on his bicycle, would swing by my house with fresh coffee, his grin reminding me of Frank's. We'd sit on my porch, sipping from mugs I'd calligraphed with silly quotes, laughing about life. Knowing I'd helped fund his dream without Brian and Nancy's greed tainting it warmed my heart like a sunny afternoon. Lauren and Kevin surprised me with a visit one crisp morning. They stood on my doorstep. "Grandma, we're so sorry," Lauren said, her eyes teary. "We got caught up in Mom and Dad's plans and didn't stand up for you." Kevin nodded, admitting his lie about his parents' finances at the brunch was wrong. I invited them in, my living room cozy with my knitted Afghan over the couch. Over tea and my homemade shortbread we talked rebuilding our bond. But here's the kicker, folks. Brian and Nancy tried to sue me, claiming I'd manipulated Frank's will. I was floored, more gall than a goat. Diane Foster, Frank's lawyer friend who runs a flower shop, called me with a chuckle. "Dorothy, you won't believe this," she said. "Frank secretly recorded Brian and Nancy mocking you at a barbecue years ago, calling you their cash cow. I found the tape in his old files." Diane used that recording in court, proving their disrespect. And the judge tossed their case faster than I toss stale bread to the birds. I was free, my heart lighter than a feather. Now I'm living my best life, dating a sweet widower, Paul from Chicago, who loves my calligraphy and shares my love for Frank's old birdwatching haunts. But I wonder, did I go too far with that codicil, cutting them out cold? Or did Brian and Nancy deserve it for treating me like a bank?
Share your thoughts in the comments. If you liked the story, subscribe to the channel and give us a like.